Take a deep breath. Let the air fill your lungs, carrying the cool of the early morning, or the warmth of the late afternoon, depending on where you are right now, perhaps on a sofa with a cup of hot tea, or on a balcony overlooking the city. Feel it, that breath, simple, instinctual, yet containing an invisible power. It is not just a biological act. It is the thread that connects you to a story grander than the stars in the night sky, more immense than the vast oceans of Earth. It is the echo of the first breath, from a moment 900,000 years ago, when the world seemed to have decided to swallow humanity whole, to erase us from the book of life. Imagine you are there in the midst of a vast desert, feeling the hot wind whip against your face, and your breath becomes more precious than ever. Today, more than 8 billion breaths harmonize on this planet. We breathe in cities glowing with neon lights, where the sound of horns blends with the laughter of the crowd, like in Saigon or New York. We breathe in golden rice fields, where the wind carries the scent of damp earth and new rice, where farmers still labor under the sun. We breathe in bright glass offices, where the typing of keyboards is the rhythm of modern life, where people race against time. We breathe in wooden cabins high in the mountains, where the thin air makes each breath more precious, where people seek peace. But let's pause for a moment. Let your mind drift back to the past, to a time when breath was not a given. A time when only 1,280 breaths remained, 1,280 small flames flickering in the cosmic storm of destruction and rebirth. This number makes me think about the fragility of life, about how easily we could have been forgotten, if not for resilient people like Aka and Kael. That is not just a cold statistic, recorded in modern laboratories with white neon lights. That was 1,280 real people, each carrying hope, fear, joy, and pain. They were individuals with names, with their own stories, with dreams distorted by a harsh reality. They were our ancestors who breathed through the darkest days and the longest nights, so that your breath, and mine, could continue today. Every time you inhale, you are repeating their act, an act of defiance against extinction, an affirmation that life goes on. Sometimes I wonder, without them, what would we be? Would the world still have bustling cities or green fields? Come with me into their story, a journey not just through time but through the human soul. We will see through the lens of two central characters, aka the old woman with skin wrinkled like a map of dried-up rivers, who holds in her heart the memory of hundreds of generations, stories passed down by firelight and desert winds, and Kael, the young hunter with broad but thin shoulders from hunger, who carries the burden of the future, with dreams of a better world he has never seen. Their breath will guide us from the darkness of environmental catastrophe to the light of a new dawn, from the loneliness of the desert to the solidarity of community. And on this journey, we will see ourselves, modern humans still struggling with similar challenges. But this story is not just about them. It is about you, about me, about all of us. Every breath you take right now is a part of that chain. Where are you listening to this story from? In a quiet room with a hot cup of coffee beside you, or amidst the hustle and bustle of the city, where the traffic provides a backdrop to your thoughts? Or are you lying on a beach listening to the waves blend with the narration? Take a moment and share your moment on X with the hashtag #JoshEchoInTheBreath. Perhaps your breath will become an inspiration for someone else, just as the breath of Aka and Kael has been passed down to us. And I believe sharing moments like these will make this story more intimate, like a real conversation. Prepare for a long journey where we will explore not just history but human nature, resilience, fear, hope, and the power of connection. We will delve into every detail, from the small grains of sand under Aka's feet to the soaring dreams of Kael, from the long nights by the fire to the brilliant dawns of rebirth. And through it all, we will see that our breaths are not separate. They are part of a grand symphony, an unceasing echo through time. An echo I feel every time I think about human history, about how we have overcome so much to be here today. On this journey, we will meet not only Aka and Kael, but also supporting characters, their companions, the invisible enemies of nature, and the spirits of their ancestors. We will explore hidden subplots like the story of Alara, Aka's granddaughter, who represents the new generation with bold ideas, or of Ren, Kael's descendant, who witnesses fateful encounters. We will dive deep into their inner lives, exploring their thoughts, dreams, and fears, making the story more vivid than ever. And now, let us begin with the first part, where we explore the world that once was, a green world now turned to desert, a world whose memory still lives in our breath, reminding us of the changes of time. In your blood right now, a story is whispering, a story written in the most ancient language, the language of DNA. It is not the voice of people you meet every day, not the whisper of the wind or the sea. It is the voice of your ancestors, etched deep in every twist of the genetic chain, a living book that each of us carries from birth. Every cell in your body contains this book, with chapters written in 4 chemical letters, A, C, G, T. These letters tell of the journey from the first life in the primordial oceans to modern humans, from single-celled organisms to small tribes. And every time I think about this, I see it as a miracle of the universe. Scientists, the explorers of the modern age, have spent decades listening to that whisper. They sit in brightly lit labs, with enormous machines analyzing millions of pieces of data, from the blood samples of Africans to the genomes of Europeans. They use tools like gene sequencers, supercomputers that run for hours to analyze data. They notice something strange. The human genome is alarmingly lacking in diversity. It's like a grand symphony played with only a few repeating notes, missing the richness of complex harmonies. Why? Why do chimpanzees, our close relatives, have a more diverse genome than all 8 billion humans combined? Why do gorillas in the African jungle have greater genetic variation than all of humanity? These questions make me constantly think about our origins. After years of research, with advanced tools like supercomputers and complex algorithms, they rewound the genetic tape and discovered a horrifying truth. 900,000 years ago, humanity stood on the brink of extinction. Our ancestral population dropped to just 1,280 individuals, and this state lasted for over 117,000 years, a period longer than the entire history of modern Homo sapiens, longer than the time since we left Africa. Imagine you are there, among a small group of people, each breath a struggle. This number sends a shiver down my spine. Imagine that scene. Not an abstract number on paper, it was 1,280 people, each a world unto themselves. They had names, families, dreams distorted by reality. They were people like Aka and Kael, who breathed through the darkest days and longest nights, so that your breath could exist today. That collapse was like 99% of their kind disappearing, like an orchestra suddenly falling silent, with only a few musicians left trying to continue the symphony of life. But they did it. They survived, and in doing so, they changed us forever. And I believe that resilience still flows in our blood. Think about those scientists. They aren't just numbers. They are people like Haiping Li and Yihuan Pan from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, who use tools like FitCol to analyze data from thousands of modern genomes. They checked and rechecked hundreds of times, because the results were too extreme to be believed. They ran mathematical models compared with data from other species, and each time, the result was the same. The data does not lie. It tells a story of a global catastrophe, a story we are only just beginning to understand, a story of how humanity nearly vanished but clung to life at all costs. This part makes me think about the miracle of science, and that story doesn't stop at the laboratory. It spreads to the world through scientific articles in Nature and Science, through university lectures at Harvard and Oxford, through popular science books like Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, or The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. It reminds us how fragile human life is, that we are just one step away from extinction, but it is also a reminder of the power of resilience, of how a small group can change the entire course of history, of how flickering breaths can become a majestic symphony. And in today's world, with so many challenges, we need to remember that more than ever. In this chapter, we have explored the whisper in the bloodline, but the journey has only just begun. Let us continue to the next chapter, where we delve into the twilight of a world where Aka and Kael begin their journey. A journey full of emotion and lessons. Aka sat on a high rock, her eyes clouded by age, staring at the sunset. The last light of day painted the desert red, turning the grains of sand into sparkling rubies. But for Aka, it was not beautiful. It was a warning, a color familiar to the point of pain, a reminder of days when the world was greener. Her wrinkled skin, like an old map with dried-up rivers, told the story of harsh, dry seasons, of rains that never came, of the losses she had witnessed from childhood until now. She remembered on similar evenings, when she was a young girl with long, dark hair, playing by the river full of water, laughing with her siblings. But now the river was dry. Her siblings were gone and the pain remained, like an unhealed wound. She remembered a distant memory, not her own, but passed down through the voice of her mother, of her grandmother, through long nights by the campfire. It was a memory of a different world, an Africa that was once the cradle of abundant life. Great rivers flowed ceaselessly, carrying silt that nourished dense forests where sunlight could only filter through the leaves, creating sparkling spots on the ground like daytime stars. Herds of antelopes, swift as the wind, were so numerous that the ground trembled beneath them, and giant beasts with curved tusks roamed freely, their roars echoing in the night. Aka's breath back then, when she was a nimble-footed little girl, carried the scent of damp earth after the rain, the smell of decaying leaves underfoot, the scent of life in full bloom, of picnics by the river with ripe fruit and fragrant grilled fish. Those memories were still vivid, as if they were just yesterday. But that world had slowly died, dying from changes no one understood, changes from the sky above or the earth below. Now there was only red sand blowing in the wind, bare laterite rocks standing like lonely sentinels, and gnarled acacia trees clinging to the dry earth, their leaves falling like laments. Every sunset, Aka sat there feeling the hot wind whip against her face, carrying sand that stung her eyes and dried her throat, carrying sand that stung her eyes. She remembered the once bustling villages, filled with children's laughter and the smell of cooking smoke, now just piles of ash scattered by the wind. She remembered the relatives who had passed, victims of persistent hunger, of parching thirst, of illnesses with no cure, illnesses that came from dirty water or disease-carrying insects. That pain never left her. It was part of her breath, a silent sigh every evening, a reminder of how fragile life is, and sometimes she wondered if the world would ever be the same again. Kael stood nearby, his shoulders broad but thin from lack of food, looking at the same sunset but with younger eyes, full of worry and determination. He had never known the green world Aka spoke of, only hearing about it through stories like ancient legends, and sometimes he wondered if they were real or just a way for Aka to comfort everyone. For Kael, the sunset was not a memory, but a reminder of another day survived, of the challenges to come in the darkness. His breath carried the dry taste of sand, constant tension, and a fragile hope like morning dew. He looked down at the cracks in the ground, wondering where the water would be tomorrow, where the food would come from. He thought about his dreams last night, dreams of a place where trees were green, rivers flowed full, and children laughed without fear of hunger. Dreams he knew were illusions but clung to for motivation. Those dreams were his only source of strength in these difficult days. They did not know that the Earth was undergoing a harsh ice age cycle, a cosmic rhythm that had changed its orbit and turned their fertile African continent into a vast desert. They did not know about the giant ice sheets in the north, sucking moisture from the atmosphere, causing the rains to stop falling regularly, turning the rivers that once sustained thousands into dry cracks on the land. They did not know about desertification, about how the climate had gradually changed over generations, from abundant rainy seasons to prolonged droughts. They only knew that every day, their world withered a little more. That the rivers that were once sources of life were now deadly crevices. That the forests that once provided cover were now sparse bushes. And in that change, They had to adapt. They had to live. Aka turned to Kael, her gaze steady despite the wrinkles like the lines on an ancient stone. "We will find water," she said, her voice hoarse but firm, like a promise carved in rock. And in her voice, Kael heard the strength of his ancestors, the strength that had helped them survive for so many generations. Kael nodded, though his heart was heavy with worry. She was the keeper of memories, the one who preserved the lessons of the past to guide the present. He was the keeper of the future, the one who carried hope for the next generation. Together, they were the hope for their small group, a group of only a few dozen people, the last survivors in this land who had lost friends and family to the disaster. They did not know that their fate was part of a larger tragedy, a bottleneck that science would later name, an event that scientists would study for centuries. But in that moment, under a sunset as red as blood, they only knew they had to keep living, keep breathing, keep walking even when their legs were tired, and they walked. Aka with her staff, Kael supporting her, a symbol of unity. They stood up, Aka leaning on her wooden staff, Kael supporting her, and they walked back to the cave where the group was waiting. On the way, Aka told another story about a great rain in the past, a rain that had saved the whole tribe. To encourage Kael, he listened, and in his heart, a seed of hope sprouted, and that seed would grow. To me, how do you think Aka and Kael's world looked through their eyes? A terrifying place of dust and drought? Or a place full of hope despite the harshness? Share your thoughts with the hashtag #EchoInTheBreath, and tell us about a time you felt the world changing around you. "Water is life," Aka whispered to her granddaughter, the little girl's eyes wide with curiosity, like stars sparkling in the desert night sky. It was not just a saying. It was their truth, their religion, a belief forged through hundreds of generations, through long dry seasons and rare, miraculous rains. And Aka told this with an emotional voice, as if sharing the secret of her life. Each day began with that sacred question, "Where is the water?" Aka was the one who answered, the one who bore the heaviest responsibility. In her mind was a living map, not drawn with ink on papyrus or animal hide, but with stories, scars on her skin, and lessons paid for by the lives of those who came before. She remembered every detail, the location of rock crevices where groundwater seeped out, the types of plants that only grew where there was moisture, the signs of wind carrying water vapor from afar, and each detail was a part of her memory, a part of her life. She led her small group, about 30 people, including strong men, resilient women, and children with hopeful eyes, across the vast desert, each step a test of survival. She pointed to an acacia tree with leaves curled in a peculiar way, like gnarled fingers begging the heavens. "Its roots go deep into the earth, finding water in the hardest layers of rock," she explained, her voice ringing like an ancient, rhythmic song, and she added, "I learned this from my mother, who saved us many times thanks to trees like these." They followed the signs that only Aka recognized, the subtle whispers of nature that she called the whispers of Mother Earth. She taught the children how to read the tracks of an antelope to find where it drank at dawn, when the night dew still clung to the leaves. She listened to the sounds of insects at night, tiny but important sounds, signaling moisture in the air or the presence of groundwater. And each lesson was a story, like the time she followed the birds to find an oasis. One day, they came to a dry riverbed, where boulders lay piled up like the giant corpses of ancient rivers. Kael looked at the bare rocks, his heart sinking, thinking of the days before water became so scarce, when he was a child and played by the stream. But Aka did not stop. She walked along the riverbed, her eyes scanning every crack, every withered bush. She remembered her mother, who had taught her how to listen to the earth, to feel the small vibrations underfoot when there was groundwater. She stopped at a bend, where the sand was slightly damper, where a few grains of sand stuck together instead of flying freely. She knelt, touched the ground, feeling the moisture through her calloused fingers, and in that moment she saw a memory of her childhood again. "Dig here," she commanded, her voice as firm as rock, full of the authority of experience. Kael and the other men used wooden sticks and sharp stones to dig, sweat running down their backs, mixing with the red dust. They dug deeper and deeper, through the dry surface layer, through the hard-packed earth until a small, muddy but precious puddle of water appeared. It wasn't much, just enough for a few sips each, but it was life, a miracle in the desert. Everyone knelt, scooping up the water, feeling it flow down their dry throats, carrying the taste of earth and hope. On the way back, Aka pointed to the tubers growing by the wayside, tubers that only she knew how to identify among hundreds of withered plants. She spoke of each one in detail, like a long poem. Which tuber needed to be boiled 3 times to remove toxins, with the water changed twice to avoid stomach aches, which could be eaten raw, but only in the morning on an empty stomach, which could be dried and kept through the long dry seasons. She told of a special root, which she called the root of the ancestors, with a bitter taste but providing energy for a whole day, and how she had used it to save a child from exhaustion. Her knowledge was their strongest weapon, the rope that pulled them from the abyss of death, and she taught them with love, like a mother. But Aka carried a deep pain, an unhealed scar in her heart, a story she rarely told but was always present. Many years ago, during the harshest dry season, she had lost her only son, a boy of just 5, to thirst and illness. That boy, with eyes like Kael's, had passed away in her arms, his faint breath gradually stopping. That pain never left her. It was present in every breath, every lesson she taught. Every time she taught a child how to find water, she saw her son's face again, and the silent promise, no one else would have to die like that. That was her motivation, the reason she still woke up every morning, though her old body cried out for rest, and that pain made her stronger. Kael hid behind a large rock, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. He held his breath, his eyes fixed on the young antelope not far away, the animal gnawing on the last dry branches in the area. And he thought, this animal is struggling just like me, with eyes full of fear. The group hadn't had fresh meat for 3 days. Aka's tubers kept them alive, but their bodies grew thin, their strength waned. Kael knew this burden was his. He was the hunter, the one who brought food home. He thought of the children, with their large, hungry eyes, and his heart tightened. That pain made him more determined, a promise to himself. He had been tracking the antelope since dawn. The small animal, perhaps lost from its mother, moved slowly. A flicker of guilt crossed his mind. This animal was also fighting to live, but the hunger of his group was greater, and Kael pushed it down. Kael moved as silent as a ghost. The spear in his hand was a precious possession, made the way his father had taught him. "You must respect your weapon," his father had once said, and that memory always haunted him, for his father had died on a similar hunt, leaving him with fear and a lesson. The wind changed direction. The antelope looked up. Kael's heart stopped. With a shout, he charged. The antelope ran. The chase began. Kael's lungs burned, his legs ached, but he did not give up. He thought of Aka, of the group, of the dream of a better world. Finally, the antelope slowed. Kael threw his spear. It fell. Kael stood there, panting, looking at the animal. He knelt, placed a hand on its chest, and whispered thanks and apologies. A ritual his father had passed down, and in that moment, he felt a connection to life, to everything around him. Carrying the antelope on his shoulders, Kael walked, each step heavy. But his heart was light. In his mind, the dream of a green world flashed, but the sunset reminded him of the present. He hummed an old song to keep his rhythm. That song gave him hope, as Aka had once taught. Night fell quickly on the desert, bringing a biting cold, a stark contrast to the scorching heat of the day, a reminder of nature's harshness, of how the world could change in a flash. Outside the small cave the group called home, the world became dangerous. The howls of wild dogs echoed from afar, like threats from the darkness. The whistling wind brought sand into the cave, like invisible fingers scratching at their skin, and the darkness swallowed everything, turning familiar rocks into frightening ghosts, making the children in the group cringe in fear, clinging to the adults. But inside the cave, a small fire flickered, banishing the darkness and cold, becoming the center of their universe. A fire they guarded like a treasure, the only source of life in the vast desert, where Aka often taught how to keep the fire by adding dry branches gradually, so it would burn steadily through the night. The fire was not just a source of light or warmth, it was the heart of the community, a place where breaths mingled, stories were told, and hope was nurtured through the long nights, where people forgot the hunger and cold outside. Everyone gathered around it, the tired men after a long day of searching, with sore muscles and red eyes from the dust, telling what they saw during the day. The women with calloused hands from digging and caring, with tired but loving smiles, whispering words of comfort, and the children with sparkling eyes reflecting the firelight, full of curiosity and hope. The children Aka always prioritized, for they were the future of the tribe, the reason they continued to fight. The smell of roasted meat from Kael's antelope spread, a rare, delicious aroma that made hungry stomachs rumble with joy, making the cave's atmosphere warmer, like a family feast in the wilderness, where everyone forgot the desert outside, if only for a moment. They shared the meat fairly, according to the inviolable rule Aka had set. The old and children first, then the able-bodied, to ensure the survival of the whole group, so no one was left behind. For Aka always said, one person weakens, the whole group weakens. Aka, with her wrinkled skin and a voice hoarse from long years, sat in the center like a priestess of the fire, her old leather coat wrapped around her, carrying the smell of smoke and earth. She told stories, her voice echoing in the cave, blending with the crackling fire and the whistling wind outside. Like an ancient melody, she told of the green world of the past, not for them to regret but for them to have hope, to know that the world could change, that the rains would one day return, and the desert would bloom again. And with every word, she painted a vivid picture, making the children smile. She told in detail about Lyra, the heroine in the tribe's legend, who saved the tribe by finding a plant with water in its stem in the middle of the desert. She told of Lyra's adventures, how Lyra ran through hot sand dunes following a flock of low-flying birds to find an oasis, facing storms and wild beasts, how she used her intelligence to trick a hungry lion by throwing stones to create a distraction, how she negotiated with another tribe to exchange food and knowledge, avoiding conflict with wise words, and bringing back new seeds for her tribe. Through the story, Aka taught a lesson about resilience, about how a woman could change the fate of the whole group. And the children listened, wide-eyed, imagining themselves as Lyra on those adventures, asking Aka innocent questions like, "Was Lyra scared, Grandma?" And Aka replied, "Scared, yes, but hope is bigger than fear." Kael sat there, listening to every word, watching the children devour the meat with smiles on their faces, feeling the fatigue from the hunt gradually fade, replaced by the warmth of the community, of the familiar faces around him, of the children's laughter echoing. He looked at Aka, saw in her eyes the wisdom of 1,000 years, the resilience he had admired since childhood, and he thought of how she had saved him when he was a boy, sick during a dry season, with the herbal leaves she found. Aka looked back at Kael, saw in his eyes the youthful strength, the determination she once had, and she smiled, knowing the legacy would continue, that Kael would be the leader when she was gone, and she whispered to him, "You will do better than I did." A child started to cough dryly, the sound echoing in the cave making everyone worry, for illness was the greatest enemy in the desert, capable of spreading like wildfire. Aka immediately took a handful of dry leaves she always carried in her leather pouch, crushed them in her calloused hands, and mixed them with a little warm water left over from the puddle they found. "Drink this, my dear," she said, her voice gentle as a breeze, handing the cup to the child with a hand trembling from old age. It was not just medicine, it was care, an affirmation that every life was precious, that the group was an inseparable family. She told of how that leaf had saved her when she was young, during a similar illness, to reassure the child, to let him know that knowledge could save lives. And the child drank, his eyes lighting up with gratitude, hugging Aka and whispering, "Thank you, Grandma." Their breaths mingled in the small, cozy space of the cave, The breath of relief after a long, challenging day, of rare fullness that made everyone smile, of belonging to a community where everyone was an indispensable part, a world trying to extinguish them. This fire and this circle of people were all they had, and it was enough for them to continue, night after night with sleepless stories with connected breaths. Aka continued her story, now about an ancient legend of the breath of the earth, a story of how their ancestors learned to breathe in sync to keep warm on cold nights, a lesson in unity. Kael listened, and in his heart, hope grew, and the group gradually fell asleep, with shared dreams of a better world, dreams nurtured by Aka's stories and Kael's strength, dreams that would help them wake up with new vigor in the morning. If you were in Aka and Kael's group, what would you contribute to survive? Telling stories to keep hope alive? Hunting to bring food, or finding herbs to heal? Share on YouTube with the hashtag #EchoInTheBreath. And tell us about a time you collaborated with others to overcome a difficulty. During that 100 millennium night, a silent change was taking place, not in the outside world of blowing dust and scorching wind, but within their very blood, in the soul of each individual, in the way they thought and felt the world. The terrible pressure of survival, the pressure that had taken thousands of lives, was rewriting their genetic story, forging them into stronger, more flexible beings. A small unseen change occurred. A tiny piece of DNA changed, merging separate parts into a stronger whole, creating new traits. Scientists would later call this chromosome fusion, a permanent scar in our genome, a mark visible in every cell. But for Aka and Kael, it was just a vague feeling, like a new energy flowing in their blood. These changes manifested gradually, over generations. Children were born smarter, learned faster, cooperated better to survive the harsh days, like Aka's grandson, who learned to sharpen a stone in a day instead of a week like she did as a child. They knew how to observe nature more keenly, remember longer, and even invent new ways to find food or water, like when a child suggested using leaves to trap night dew. Kael observed them, seeing this change as a miracle from the ancestors, a gift from those who had passed to give strength to the next generation. She told Kael about it. The children today are stronger than we were, and Kael nodded, seeing hope in their eyes. They did not know about this change. Aka didn't feel it in her body, as she taught the children how to read tracks in the sand, how to recognize the small signs of nature. Kael didn't know that his descendants would have more powerful brains, capable of dreaming and creating beyond imagination, of painting on cave walls or creating new tools from simple materials. But every time they taught each other how to make a sharper spear, how to find water more efficiently, how to tell stories to keep spirits up, they were planting the seeds for a new future. Every story Aka told was a seed. Every hunt Kael undertook was a step forward. Every time they held each other on a cold night was a reinforcement of that change. And Aka felt, without knowing its name, that their tribe was growing stronger every day. Imagine Aka sitting by the fire, watching a small child learn to sharpen a stone to make a tool. The child was quicker than she had been, remembered the lesson faster, and even invented a new way of sharpening by using sand as an abrasive. Aka smiled, thinking it was a miracle from the ancestors, that the spirits of the departed were protecting them, whispering secrets into the children's ears. But it was the result of natural selection, of the weak who had perished, leaving the strongest, those with better adapted genes. It was the seed of the future, sprouting from the ashes of disaster, from the losses Aka and Kael had witnessed. And Aka, with her sharp memory, became the symbol of that adaptation. Kael, with his youthful strength, the one who put it into action. That change spread slowly, like an underground river beneath the desert, nurturing life that no one saw immediately. It showed in how their group began to organize better, share knowledge more effectively, and dream of a distant future, like when Aka saw children playing games simulating finding water, or Kael saw them cooperating in small hunts. Aka told the group about these changes, seeing them as signs from the heavens, and everyone listened, hope growing, for in the desert, every small change was a miracle. After a time that felt endless, the world began to change again. The rains returned, not the scattered showers that brought fleeting hope, but abundant, lasting rains, turning the desert into green grasslands, making the cracked earth soft, causing plants to grow where it was once barren. Small streams began to flow, carrying fresh water and hope. And Aka, upon seeing the first rain, knelt on the ground, feeling the water soak through her fingers, her tears mixing with the rain, for she knew this was rebirth. One morning, Aka's granddaughter, now a strong young woman named Alara, woke up and smelled the scent of damp earth, the scent of life returning after so many dry years. She looked out of the cave and saw green shoots emerging from the barren ground, tiny flowers blooming after the night's rain, insects beginning to fly and birds returning to sing. She ran to Aka, her eyes bright with joy. "Grandma, the earth is alive again. Plants are growing and I hear birds singing." Aka smiled, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. She hugged Alara tightly, feeling her granddaughter's youthful breath, and whispered, "This is a gift from the ancestors. My child." That moment was the new dawn after the long night. The rebirth Aka had waited for all her life, and Alara, with new vitality, began to dream of her own adventures. The world was regenerating, and so was humanity. From over 1,000 people, the population boomed like a long-dammed river suddenly released, fanning out into many deltas, spreading everywhere. Small groups like Aka and Kael's multiplied rapidly, with healthier children being born. New villages springing up by new rivers, where people began to build more stable lives. They began to explore, to migrate, to seek better lands, carrying with them the memories and lessons from the desert. And Alara, with the curiosity of youth, often asked Aka about distant lands. Some stayed in their ancestral lands in Africa, continuing to refine their skills of adaptation to the changing environment. They learned to plant the first seeds from wild plants, to build sturdier huts from wood and leaves, to create new tools from stone and bone. They became Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, who would conquer the world with intelligence, flexibility, and the ability to tell stories to pass down knowledge. And Aka saw that in Alara, who began to plant small trees in the village. Others, curious and brave like Kael, followed the migrating herds northward, to a colder land with heavy snow and biting wind. They adapted by making thick fur coats from animal skins, hunting larger beasts like mammoths, and developing skills to survive in the ice, like digging snow caves for shelter. They became the Neanderthals, strong and resilient, with large brains and excellent cold tolerance, who painted on cave walls and buried their dead with flowers. Those journeys were arduous, but carried the hope from Aka. Another group headed east, crossing vast deserts to the mysterious continent of Asia, with its towering mountains like the Himalayas and dangerous tropical jungles. They explored distant islands, adapted to diverse climates from hot and humid to cold, learned to build houses in trees or caves. They were the Denisovans, the explorers carrying the breath of survival to new horizons, their genes mixing with local populations. And Alara dreamed of such journeys, asking Aka about distant lands. They parted on misty mornings with blessings and promises to meet again, with small gifts like tools or seeds. They did not know it was a separation that would last hundreds of thousands of years, that their descendants would meet again in surprising reunions. But each group carried the breath of the survivors, of Aka and Kael, and continued to write new, diverse chapters in the great book of humanity. "400,000 years later, a distant descendant of Kael named Ren walked through a dense forest in the Middle East, with towering ancient trees and leaves rustling in the wind. He was a Homo sapiens, a pioneer in a small group that had left Africa, seeking new lands with better hopes, with rivers full of fish and forests full of fruit. And Ren carried memories from his ancestors, the stories of the desert that Aka had once told. One day, while tracking a herd of deer through the undergrowth, Ren saw strange footprints in the damp earth, footprints that were larger, wider, with shorter toes. He stopped, his heart racing, feeling the presence of something different. Then he saw them standing on the other side of a small stream, the water babbling like a whisper from the past. A group of shorter, more robust people, with broad faces, heavy brow ridges, and deep-set eyes. They were the Neanderthals, his distant cousins, and Ren felt a strange sense of familiarity. Imagine that moment. Fear initially spread. Ren gripped his spear, his muscles tensing, ready to fight. On the other side of the stream, the Neanderthals were also wary, their hands on their stone axes. The air was heavy, but then across the water they looked into each other's eyes. In those eyes, Ren saw not an enemy but a person with similar fears. A Neanderthal lowered his weapon, and Ren followed suit. They approached slowly, through the cold stream. They touched hands, feeling the warm skin, and then shared food, a piece of dried meat from Ren, a handful of wild berries from the Neanderthal. They did not speak the same language, but through gestures they told stories, shared knowledge. The Neanderthal taught Ren how to make a fire in the cold. Ren taught how to trap animals. They did not only fight, they met, shared, and even loved. Neanderthal DNA still flows in us, a trace of those encounters. But peace was not always the case. There were conflicts over resources, over territory. The Neanderthals were robust, skilled hunters in the cold, but Homo sapiens were more flexible, with sophisticated tools. Gradually, Homo sapiens thrived, and the Neanderthals vanished. But their breath lives on, a reminder of connection. The story of Aka and Kael does not end in Africa 900,000 years ago. It is not an old chapter in a book that we can read and then close. It is a symphony still being played, and the main instrument is you. Their echo is not far away. It is right here in every beat of your heart, in every choice you make. Think about this. Every time you feel an urge to connect, to share a meal, to tell a story, or simply to sit with someone in silence, that is the echo of Aka. It is the instinct to build community, forged by flickering fires over thousands of generations. It is the legacy of a woman who understood that no one can survive alone. Every time you face a seemingly insurmountable challenge, a difficult project, a personal loss, an uncertain future, and you find within yourself the strength to move forward, that is the echo of Kael. It is the resilience of the hunter, who faced a dying world but still shouldered his spear each morning. It is the unspoken vow that tomorrow must be better than today. But the legacy is not only light, it also has shadows. Every time you feel an unfounded anxiety about scarcity, a fear of not having enough, even when you are surrounded by plenty, that is also their echo. It is the memory of hunger and thirst etched deep into our genetic subconscious. Every minor illness your body has to fight off is a reminder of the price of survival, of the genetic shield that was worn down in exchange for existence. Their legacy is not a simple story of victory. It is a complex tapestry, woven from strength and fragility, from hope and scars that never fully heal. And this is our great paradox, a question that the echo from the past poses to the present. We are the descendants of master cooperators. The ability to connect and work together in large groups is the superpower that helped humanity triumph. So why, in this modern world, with all our connective technology, do we feel more divided than ever? We, the children of a family of 1,080, why do we build walls between us? We are the embodiment of adaptation. The flexibility of our minds helped our ancestors survive a devastating climate change. So why, when faced with a new climate change of our own making, do we act so slowly? Are we listening to the echo in our breath? Or has the noise of the modern world drowned out the whisper of our ancestors? The story of Aka and Kael is not a guarantee for our future. It is a warning and an invitation, a warning that life is fragile, that even the most intelligent species can stand on the brink, and an invitation to remember who we are, where we come from. An invitation to find strength, not in technology or weapons, but in the connection, empathy and resilience that were forged in the 100 millennium night. The answer does not lie in the past. It lies in your choices today. Call to action. What question does the legacy of our ancestors pose to you about the modern world? Which paradox makes you reflect the most? Share your deep thoughts on X with the hashtag #JoshEchoInTheBreath. And now our journey has come to an end. But the real story has not. It is still being written by you. So let's do that now, together. Find a quiet place, close your eyes. Take a deep breath, slowly. Feel the air enter, bringing life. That is not just oxygen. It is the breath of Kael, held in a thicket, his heart pounding as the prey drew near. It is focus, burden, the promise of a meal for his family. Now slowly exhale. Feel the release, the letting go. That is not just carbon dioxide. It is the lullaby of Aka by the fire, a wordless melody to soothe a frightened child. It is the transmission of knowledge, peace, the affirmation that we are safe, at least for tonight. Breathe in. It is the first breath of a child born into a harsh world, a cry that defied the silence of the desert. Breathe out. It is the last breath of an elder, released in the arms of the tribe, their spirit merging with the fire and the memory of those who remain. That chain has never been broken. Through tens of thousands of generations, through ice ages, through migrations, through the rise and fall of empires, that river of breath still flows. It flowed through the Neanderthals our ancestors met. It flowed through the first farmers who planted seeds in the earth. It flowed through the Greek philosophers who gazed at the stars. It flowed through the explorers who crossed oceans. It flowed through your grandmother, through your mother. And now it flows through you. The outside world can fade for a moment. The worries of today, the plans for tomorrow, let them drift away. Only the breath remains. Your breath. Their breath, a river, flowing forever. You are not just a drop in that river. You are the entire river. All of history, all the pain, all the love, and all the hope of humanity are here, in you, in this moment. You are the echo, and you are also the voice for the future. Rest in that great and peaceful truth. Let the river carry you to sleep. Sweet dreams.